Now, we will go to another part of the world. Devinder Sharma, who is an Indian scientist, writer, analytician of food and trade policy. He's been working with food security and biodiversity, sustainable agriculture for many years. He's also a leader of Forum for Biotechnology and Food Security in New Delhi. And I think a view from an Indian perspective is especially interesting because everybody is talking about China and the future global food security, but India, they will be more people, they have less land, and in 2050 there will be as much people in India alone as it was in the whole world 100 years before, more or less. And that's, I think, maybe the biggest challenge of them all in the next 30 to 40 years. So, Devinder Sharma, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. Well, I'm not going to use the audio visuals, so I think to apply what David said, your Hobson choice is to look at me. Ladies and gentlemen, I come from India, and I have two things to share with you, first of all. It's heartening to share with you that this year, India was able to put a moratorium on genetically modified foods and crops. And this happened after 4 years of long struggle that I happened to coordinate that movement called Coalition for GM-Free India, which actually resulted in the moratorium. And I would suggest, like the brilliant presentation made by the minister in the morning, the Environment Minister of India, when he presented the moratorium, he presented a document, 19-page document, which is on the website of Ministry of Environment. Any scientist anywhere in the world must look at what the document says. I think it's a brilliant, brilliant presentation. It tells you what science should be all about, what science cannot ignore. I think that is a message which is very powerful to understand. The second thing which I want to share with you also is that I come from a country which, of course, has been the citadel of Green Revolution, but is also facing the negative impacts of Green Revolution. In the last 15 years, we have had over 200,000 farmers committing suicide. This is perhaps 4 times more than the number of farmers you have in Norway. 200,000 farmers committing suicide because the entire GR equation, Green Revolution equation, went wrong. And I think that is a very strong message that when will humanity start learning from our mistakes? And I think in my presentation, I'll try to come to that. Now, to begin with, 2 developments that took place recently. Last week, Guardian announced, the newspaper Guardian in London announced that McDonald's and Pepsi-Cola has been asked to write the health policy of UK. I think we should all be very happy. I thought Monsanto was writing the agriculture policy of America, but now the health policies are being written by companies like McDonald's and Pepsi-Cola. So it is world over. You know, we have all these companies in India, the agriculture policies are being written by McKinsey. So we get to know what exactly is being designed. So when we talk of genetically modified crops, the topic that we're discussing today, I think we need to see genetically modified crops as a part of a package. And unless you see that package, you will not be able to see where exactly it is going to hit you. And I think that is very important. In my half an hour or 45 minutes, I'll try to at least showcase what I think is the package that we need to look at it. GM does not operate in isolation. And that, we just mentioning that, trade policies and economic policy, I think unless we try to decipher that, we will never be clear about what is happening. Now, this is happening, this was one part of my thing that I wanted to share with you, the 2 things that I mentioned. The second thing was President Obama was recently in India. The world's biggest salesman going around the world was, of course, looking for jobs in India. And he said very clearly that we want India to go in for second green revolution. And he said, you take the technology from America, America would like to shake hands with India. And India needs to give technology to Africa where your technology is more applicable. Wow, what a brilliant way, to solve a number of problems. He solves the problems of American industry, and of course also tries to give a pat on our back that you can address the problems of Africa. So this is where we are today. So I think lots of things should become clear to us where we are. Ladies and gentlemen, when we talk of genetically modified crops and foods, the first and foremost thing is that the world population is going to grow to 9 billion by the year 2050. So the world needs to produce more. As somebody said, 100%, somebody said 70%. So therefore, we need to improve productivity and production, and so therefore, we need genetically modified crops. You have heard it again and again. But let us look at it. Does the world really need to produce more, as Hans said in the morning? We have 6.7 billion people on this planet. We produce food for 11.5 billion people. We already produce food for double the population. And yet we are being told that we need to produce more. It's only that one part of the world is eating more, the other part of the world is going hungry. Now what we need to do is actually to address the problem of excess and distribution. We need to ensure how to balance it out that everyone is fed. How to stop those losses, reduce those losses that everyone has been talking about. 40% food goes waste on an average. Country like India, as was mentioned, 600 million people are suffering from hunger in Asia. I think that's an understatement. I think the UN actually is also giving an understatement when it says 900 million, 925 million people suffer from hunger. I think the figure is much, much higher. We are trying to cover it up. In India, the hunger line is $0.50 per day. In $0.50 per day, I can't even bring up my dog. How can you bring up a human being in $0.50? So we have deliberately kept our hunger population or hunger line low to ensure that everything looks honky-donkey, So that is how we have developed. And I think internationally, what is happening in India is also happening internationally. I think it's an understatement to say we have 925 million. That would be the kind of people living in hunger in India alone. But does India have enough food, or is it short of food? You will be surprised. This year alone, again, we have a surplus of 60 million tons of food grains, wheat and rice. 60 million tons. I don't think it hits us or makes any impact on us. We are used to the figures being tossed around 60, 80, 90 million tons, and so on. Ladies and gentlemen, let me simplify it for you. You keep one bag of grain, which is 100 kilo, over another bag of grain, over another bag of grain, another bag of grain. Like that, if you were to stack the food that is lying in India, you could actually walk up to the moon and come back. That's the quantity of food lying in India. For the last 2 years, the television in India has been showing us every other day stories of how food is rotting in the godowns of India. Rats are eating that food, and yet people are living in hunger. We need to understand, do we need to produce more? There is a problem now happening, a new phenomenon that is developing all over Asia now. It's called produce and perish. You produce more and you perish because there are no buyers. The WTO has again brought in another kind of a stage in the world when farmers of one country are pitted against farmers of another country. That we don't want to understand, and we don't want to say we need to raise production. On the one hand, there is a WTO, World Trade Organization, which I always call as the wrong trade organization, which has again been written by companies, corporations, and so on, and of course the government's backing it up. It is trying to ensure that the farmers disappear. Over the years, the farmers are being pushed out of land, and on the other hand, we want to raise productivity. How can these two policies be going hand in hand? There's something terribly going wrong with the way we look at science, technology, and also economic policies. I think we as a society have failed the farmers as well as the community. Let us try to look at what has happened. Hunger, they say, can be taken care of GM crops. Let me tell you, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, there is no genetically modified crop in the world which increases productivity. In fact, all indications tell us, and the scientists cover it up by calling it yield drag. Actually, it means the crops are yielding low. This is what is happening. And then we are being told these are the potential crops. How can that be those potential crops when they are yielding lower than what we exist today? On the other hand, we are also being told these are the crops which will address micronutrient deficiency. We will hear more about it soon. And that is another thing that we need to focus on. I sometimes wonder, genetically modified crops have been in America for the last 14, 15 years. I thought America should have taken care of its hunger. America has broken all records as far as hunger is concerned in the last 14 years. 1 person among 10 is in hunger today in America. European Union is no better. You have 40 million people living in hunger. And of course, the lessons are to us to remove our hunger. Ladies and gentlemen, the best way to remove hunger is to get away from this integration that we talk about, globalization. Why I'm saying this is, ever since the World Bank and IMF began the policy of structural adjustment program, and then the WTO jumped in with the legal teeth, what has happened in these years is that there are 149 countries which are classified as third world countries. India happens to be one of them. 105 of these countries have actually become food importing countries. And I am sure that when the Doha development round is completed, the majority of the rest of the countries would also become food importing countries. What a wonderful model to develop and ensure food security. So two things are happening. We are pushing the farmers out of agriculture, and we are also ensuring that the world becomes food import. You start importing more and more food. So the world is now being divided into, it was already divided into two parts, the north and the south, but now it will be one part of the world will produce food, the other would always be standing with the begging bowl. Are we really concerned about improving the lot of the farmers? In 2006, I did a survey of the US database on agriculture. I found they had 900,000 farmers left. 2 years later, when I did a survey again, I found they had 700,000 farmers left. In fact, in the previous census 2000 of America, America has stopped counting the number of farmers for the first time in history. In fact, we should be more worried about farmers disappearing than the biodiversity disappearing. And if you look at America, European Union, it's no better. Despite all your subsidies, phenomenal subsidies, your direct income support and so on, one farmer quits agriculture every minute in Europe. The same phenomena is now being pushed on to developing countries. You know, countries like India, countries like China, farmers have to be pushed out of agriculture because that's what GDP will ensure. You know, if you have to grow your economically, you have to push farmers out of agriculture. But that also means that as long as the farmers remain, the corporations will find it difficult to survive. So the farmers have to be out. So on the one hand, we have a policy of shifting this population out, and on the other hand, we want to raise productivity and production. How can these things be going hand in hand? What I'm trying to say is that science cannot operate in vacuum. You have to ensure that your economic policies, your public policies are in tune with what you are suggesting. But unfortunately, the scientific community has failed us, and I must say this very loudly and clearly. Scientific community has not looked at the economic policies impacting the world. They just think it is not their job. They know it is their job, but then you don't get your promotion. Now that is what is happening all over the world. Now, if that is the situation, are we on the right track? You know, Green Revolution was a savior, yes, in many ways. But I think we have to draw lessons from what happened by Green Revolution. Green Revolution, actually, the land grant system of education that came to our country, of which I'm a student, I'm sure many of you are students of the same land grant system of education borrowed from America, actually made me believe and made us believe that our agriculture was backward, substandard, and inefficient. I always thought, why is it that the land known for holy cows, I know everybody laughs when India's cows are talked about. We are the land of holy cows. I always thought, what has gone wrong with India's cows that they have suddenly become unproductive after independence? If you look at the history of Indian agriculture, the cows were very productive. The kings would revere their cows and so on. We have 30 breeds of cows. They're all locally adaptable. One of the cows, the smallest cow breed in the world is called Vechur. It comes from Kerala in India. It is about 2.5 feet high. It only requires 2 kg of feed every day to survive. So these are all location-specific things. But suddenly, after independence, I realized that everyone is despising Indian cows. Something has gone wrong with Indian cows. Unless you import Jersey and Holstein Friesian, you cannot improve the milk productivity in India. That's what we were told. We did that. 80% of our cows are nondescript. But my eyes got opened when I read a FAO report recently. It said Brazil, which is halfway down the world, has actually become the biggest exporter of Indian breeds of cows. It will startle you. I traveled to Brazil to see, and I went to a milk competition where they made me the chief guest because I was very keen on that. For 3 days, the cows were milked, 80 cows. The cow which stood first was Gir from Gujarat with a yield of 48.8 liters per day. The cow which stood second was again Gir from Gujarat with 45 liters. The cow which stood third was Kanakraj from South India, Andhra Pradesh, 42 liters. The cow which stood fourth was Jersey with 41 liters. The message is very clear. If we had worked on our own cows, our cows would not have been roaming on the streets. But somehow we were made to believe that everything is backward, substandard in our country. And that's what is happening through Green Revolution technology. We need to understand that. The education system has made us believe that there's nothing good in our country. All the problems that we have, the solutions lie in the West. And we have compounded the crisis. Let me give you another example. Earthworm is the nature stealer. Suddenly after independence, when the Green Revolution came in, I was a student, nobody talked about the importance of earthworm. We were talking about NPK, nitrogen, phosphorus, potash, and all those things, and everybody said we had to increase production, forget about earthworm. So we forgot about earthworm. For all these years, I was thinking the earthworm has a very important role to play in our agriculture. Why is it that Indian scientists were not concerned about earthworm? Then 40 years later, America realized the potential of earthworm. They imported earthworm. When they imported earthworm, it became an invasive alien species. Today, if you look at the USDA reports, earthworm is an invasive alien species in America. I realized, I got my answer. Because American scientists did not talk about earthworm, the Indian scientists also forgot to talk about earthworm. Because whatever happens in America has to happen in India. So we follow blindly those scientists, and we think that we are very concerned about our agriculture, the kind of technology that we talk about. Ladies and gentlemen, that is where we have failed. The technology that has been given to us is actually technology which is alien to us and has done more damage, and that is why Indian farmers are dying. And not only Indian farmers, all developing countries, and even farmers here are dying. I think that is a price that we need to see who will pay that price eventually. How long do you want farmers to go on sacrificing their lives? I think that is a lesson that we must see. When we talk of farmers, what can GM crops do to them, I think is a lesson that we derive from the first Green Revolution. As Hans said in the morning, and the other speakers also said in the morning, that we saw the quantum jump in fertilizers, we saw the quantum jump in pesticides, the water guzzling crops, and so on and so forth. The genetically modified industry always told us that when we have these BT crops coming in, pesticides is one thing which we'll see the reduction of pesticides. Has it really happened? Pesticides usage has gone up in America, we all know that. Pesticide usage has gone up in China on BT cotton, also we know that. Interestingly, pesticide usage has gone up in India also. On BT cotton, the only crop that we have in India, which is not a food crop as you know, the usage of pesticide in 2006 was 600 million rupees. In 2008, it went up to 800 million. So in these 2 years, look at the quantum jump. And the area under BT cotton has grown in India, not because the farmers were excited, but because the industry and the agriculture scientists, they always work in tandem. There are very few exceptions, let me tell you. So what happened was the agriculture scientists and the industry, they ensured that the non-BT cotton seed disappears from the market. So in the hybrid crops, there's a biological patent, so you have to go in for buying seed every fresh year. But there is no non-BT cotton seed available. The poor chap has no choice but to buy BT cotton seed. That is how the industries try to push technologies. And look at the desperation. I happen to sit on a CGIAR committee, Consultative Group on International Agriculture Research. I was shocked when a presentation was made by one of the Director Generals of the Institute, and he said, this is a wonderful proposal that we have. Ladies and gentlemen, let me share that with you. The proposal said, there's an institute in America called the Medicine Institute, not the MEDICINE, but the Medicine Institute. So they want to collaborate with CGIAR. They wanted to tell the world that, look, in Africa, more people are dying in the rural areas from HIV/AIDS. So there is a shortage of labor. So therefore, we need BT cotton. Therefore, we need BT maize, because there is less spray of pesticides. This CGIAR wanted to collaborate. So what happens? You have to look for a figurehead, a national state head, who can be pliable. So they picked up President Moi of Kenya. Those of you who come from Kenya would know what President Moi depicted when he was the president. And so it was very easy to sell that concept to President Moi. But when we stood up in the CGIAR, we opposed this technology. Now CGIAR doesn't talk about it. Because I remember in the very first meeting, I had asked a question, okay, in the rural areas, labor is going away. We have shortage of labor. But I thought in the urban centers also there is a shortage of labor. Should we go in for human cloning then? No, we can't go in for human cloning. When there is shortage of labor, why not? So wherever, look at the desperation, they can go up to the extent of even justifying using HIV/AIDS to promote genetically modified crops. What I'm trying to say, ladies and gentlemen, is this the way forward? Is this what will ensure food security? Let us look at countries' food security in India. It is often said that India is a country which needs to raise productivity and production. As I said earlier, we have a huge surplus that we have in India. The problem is where? We have then being told that we also have more of malnutrition in India, micronutrient deficiency, of course. Anyone who cannot fill his belly for a day would definitely be malnourished. And then it's interesting, you giving choices. You say, now you have rice, we'll give you golden rice. And this will be a humanitarian task, of course. So you are trying to say that it will remove your micronutrient deficiency. Ladies and gentlemen, there's rice lying in front of the poor's eyes. He can't buy it. If you were to actually ensure that you buy that rice, you will take care of not only his hunger, but also his hidden hunger. That you don't want to do. You don't want to bring in those policies. I have always been saying, you don't have to worry about MDGs. You don't have to worry about MDGs. If you really want to eradicate hunger, come to India. We have 1/3 of the world's hungry with us, and we have a huge buffer also with us. There is food, there are hungry. Come and help us. I want to invite the genetically modified industry, and as far as also the agriculture scientists, to eradicate hunger now. But nobody will come. Nobody wants to ensure that food security. But you are all wanting to bring in technology because that's where you make money. So basically, it is our own livelihood that we are concerned about, not the livelihood of the poor farmer that we are aiming at. We use that very cleverly to actually promote our interest. And this has been happening all over the world that we see. Not only in one, second, or third country, but across the globe. Ladies and gentlemen, is that the way forward? The common argument again is, if you go to America, Americans have been eating genetically modified food for last 14 years, 15 years. Nobody has fallen sick. So why are you worried about the health impacts? Before that, when we were launching the BT Brinjal campaign in India, it's very interesting. The rotten regulatory system that operates in America and India, no different. The FDA is no better than the Genetic Engineering Approval Committee of India. I want to ask you, many of you if you happen to be molecular geneticists, the report of the Myco company said, when it was tested the BT Brinjal on rats, it said the problem that it had because of those eating the BT Brinjal, it said it was biologically significant, but not statistically significant. Can anyone explain to me what does it mean? How can it be biologically significant and statistically insignificant? Even if one rat is facing one problem, it is your responsibility to see why it is facing problem. Look at this argument. It is biologically significant and statistically insignificant. And the GEAC, comprising of brilliant agriculture scientists, approved that. Do you know that the rats follow a 5-day week? I thought only the scientists and the company executives follow a 5-day week. In the 90 days food trial that we are going to expose now, it has been shown that actually Monsanto fed the genetically modified crop to the rats for 5 days. For the 2 days, the normal food was fed to them. I never knew rats were also on a 5-day week. Is that the kind of system? There are lies, distortions, manipulations. My God, look at the reports of Monsanto, Syngenta, and even the agriculture universities across the world, and you will see what deception is. I had never realized that scientists could go so wrong. They know what they are doing, and yet they will stand up to that. We are not opposed to science, we are not opposed to technology. But you will agree, we need science and technology to be perfect before it reaches the farmers. Otherwise, how many more farmers you want to die before you are not happy with your kind of stock markets? Ladies and gentlemen, we have again been hearing again and again that 2008 you had the food crisis. Now again we are hoping that there will be the food bubble is going to burst again. But is it because of the shortage of food? Or is it because of the stock markets? Even when the food crisis was there in 2008, we know 37 countries faced riots, one government was pushed out of power. The stocks of all, ladies and gentlemen, As I said, we were talking about America. The Americans have been eating all these grains for the last 14 years. Nothing has gone wrong. If I want to ask you a question, if you and me fall sick, I go to a doctor, you go to a doctor and complain that you have a pain in the stomach. Can the doctor ever point out that it is because of a foreign DNA in that food that you ate? There's no medical assay. There's no medical protocol which actually tells you that what harm can these crops do to your body. A. B, if you look at America, America today is the sickest nation among the rich countries. If you look at the quantum jumps in the ailments in America, dementia has increased 80%, autism has increased, diabetics has increased, cancer, heart, whatever you want to say is increasing in America. I'm not saying there's a direct correlation here, but please tell me, is there a way that you can say it is not because of genetically modified crops? Please tell me one study which says it is not because of GM crops. If you believe FDA believes what Monsanto tells them. And Monsanto will only tell them what they want FDA to hear. But the question is, you and me have a responsibility, ladies and gentlemen. We need to stand up and ask, are these the kind of crops that we have no other alternative that we have to look forward to? Come to my country and I will show you what agriculture is all about. We are talking about crops like drought resistant and salt resistant and so on. Please come with me. I have been challenging Monsanto chairperson a number of times. Come with me. How many crops you want to see of drought tolerant and salt tolerant and all these kinds of things? I will take you there. But you don't want to. You don't want to. You never want to come. You want to say, give the impression to the world that, oh, we are producing a drought resistant crop and that is the answer. No. We already have hundreds of drought resistant plants which nobody wants to talk about. That is where we are saying, why do we want to miss the woods for the trees? Please come and look at it, what exactly we have got. India is a country, one of those mega biodiversity countries. We are home to 45,000 plant species. Rice is only one of them. You can have 100,000 of strains, but you count it as one species. If you look at USA, if you look at the politics of genetic resources, America is actually home to only 5 plant species and 3 animal species. That's what they can call it belongs to them. Among the 5 plant species, the most important plant species they've got is safflower. Among the animals, the most important animal they've got is swine. You cannot build a superpower on 5 plant species and 3 plant species. So therefore, you must collect judicially or legally or illegally and so on. After you have done that, you need intellectual property rights, as my colleague mentioned about the new IPR regime. So that is how you control. You control technology, you control science, you control resources. On the one hand, we have this system operating. I don't see scientists talking about how to get rid of the IPR system as far as agriculture research is concerned. What I'm trying to say is there are all things linked with one another. And unless we try to decipher that, we will never be able to understand what is going wrong. This is where we have reached so far, ladies and gentlemen. Now, the question that needs to be asked is there a way out? Everyone says that, we have to raise production, we have to raise productivity. How can you do that when on the one hand, the governments are trying to push farmers out of agriculture? We are trying to ensure that the land is taken over by the companies, by the real estate. In 1996, the World Bank and the then chairperson of CGIAR and the vice chair of the World Bank, Ismail Sarageldin, he made a statement. He said that the number of people migrating from the rural to the urban areas in India by the year 2020 will be equal to twice the combined population of UK, France, and Germany. The combined population of UK, France, and Germany is about 200 million. So the World Bank had at that time warned us that it was 400 million people would be migrating from the rural to the urban areas in India, and this is more than the population of America, incidentally, will be migrating from the rural to the urban areas in India. I thought that was a warning. But if you read the 2008 World Development Report, as the minister said in the morning, it actually tells us that this has to be facilitated now fast. It says land is a productive asset which is in the hands of unproductive people, the farmers. So you have to go in for land rentals and move this population out of agriculture, and that's exactly what India is doing. So we are, on the one hand, moving people out of agriculture. On the other hand, we are telling people that we have to raise productivity. Look at it. How can these things be going hand in hand? There's something fundamentally and phenomenally going wrong. And I think that is what I suppose this conference, at the end of it, you and me can decide what exactly are the kind of policies that we need to lay out. That is where we have failed, ladies and gentlemen, because we haven't taken control over science and technology. We have allowed science and technology into the hands of private companies. Few people sitting in a boardroom decide what is good for us. And I think it is a responsibility as a society to stand up and question that. We haven't done that. We did that in India. Believe me, when we raised that campaign against BT Brinjal, the society woke up. It was for the first time they got an exposure about what BT Brinjal was all about. And ultimately, the government was forced to impose a moratorium. I know it is not going to be easy. There is a lot of pressure to lift that moratorium. But I'm sure Indians have had that tradition and history of throwing things out whenever they have stood up to it. But I think the world also needs to draw a lesson from that kind of a system that operates. And I think Norway is a great, great hope for us. Some people say it's the last frontier. I think it's the first frontier. You have always stood up to these kinds of policies, and I think you have, as long as you stay, there is hope for the world, for developing world. And I am very hopeful that Norway can show us that way. I am very happy when the minister said in the morning what he said. I wish he was the Minister for Agriculture in India also. We need that kind of clear-hearted, clear vision people. You know, we don't need people who say, no, we have to give everything a chance. We have suffered enough for saying that. Now, is there a way out? Ladies and gentlemen, will you have any problem if I were to give you a model where we do not use chemical fertilizers, where we do not use chemical pesticides, where the yields don't drop, where the soil is not poisoned, where your health is secure, where there's no global warming? Will you have any problem? I didn't hear your voice. Will you have any problem? Ladies and gentlemen, that's a model which Hans tried to project. But that's happening in reality. It's not only a kind of a projection. There is a state in South India called Andhra Pradesh. Andhra Pradesh, one village started it all 6 years back. They stopped using chemical pesticides because they realized that much of the problem in agriculture was because of chemical pesticides. So they stopped using chemical pesticides. They found that the number of insects also came down. They found that the yields did not come down. So obviously, seeing is believing. It began to expand. 6 years. In 6 years, 2010, 2 million acres is under an agriculture system where they do not use pesticides, where they do not use genetically modified crops, where they do not use even fertilizer now. And what has happened? In these 5-6 years, the crop yields have gone up. The insects have come down. The health expenses of the people have come down by 40% because more the pesticides, more the fertilizer, more were the problems that you faced as far as your health is concerned. And farmers began to experiment this, take it on their own. The government then stepped in. It's a government-run program which has now expanded to 2 million acres. I have been challenging Monsanto and also the Vice Chancellors of Agriculture University in India to come and see that. Believe me, the only people who are refusing to come and acknowledge that are the agriculture scientists and the company executives. The reason is obvious. If it can happen in 2 million acres, the state has now set a target of 10 million acres by the year 2014. I think that's the way forward. That's the way forward. This is the kind of agriculture where no farmer commits suicide. This is a kind of agriculture where no one picks up the gun. As you know, 1/3 of India is faced with another problem of Naxalites or Maoism. And this is because we destroyed agriculture. We are destroying agriculture, which is the first line of defense against Maoism. The government of India goes by the Western policies, Western economic thinking. So they go on adding our problems or adding on to our crisis in India. But I think people are trying to show the way. I think that's the way forward. Ladies and gentlemen, if you are a farmer here, if you are a farmer in India, if you are a farmer in a developing world, please let us try to learn from each other. Let us try to build up a safer and a sustainable future. And that is where the answer lies. If you don't do that, I'm sure that 10 years later, when Professor Sissel organizes another conference on genetically modified foods here, there would be no farmers left in Norway. Because the entire effort is to push farmers out of agriculture. And I think that is a thing that is happening, moving at a fast pace, that we are pushing farmers out of agriculture. My worry is because I come from a country which has 600 million farmers. Every fourth farmer in the world is an Indian. Together with China, we make up half the world's farming population. The answer for us, ladies and gentlemen, is not to push these farmers out of agriculture, but to make agriculture profitable, economical, and sustainable. And this can be done provided we go in for low external sustainable agriculture. And that's what IAA-STD has shown us. That's the way forward. And as I said, Andhra Pradesh model, the non-pesticide management model, is exactly what we need. Scientists do realize, but it takes them some time. The International Rice Research Institute in 2007 said for the first time that it was a mistake to have asked farmers to use pesticides on rice. This was in the year 2007. 2007 or 2005, Robert Cantrell then was the Director General. And he said it was a mistake to ask farmers to use pesticides on rice because now we find millions of farmers in central Luzon province of Philippines, in India, in Bangladesh, and Vietnam are growing rice without using chemical pesticides. And that is, I think, something that farmers and activists were saying much before that environmentalists were telling us, but we did not pay heed to them. The time has come now, ladies and gentlemen, that we as society must stand up and realize what is good for us